Hi, Alicia here. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to do my May wrap-up. Yo, how's it going? How you doing? I hope you are doing well. Today I am here to share with you the 9 books that I read in the month of May. May was a really good reading month for me. I read lots of great and fun and interesting books. They range in genres from horror to thriller to mystery to even some magical realism thrown in there. My range of ratings are between 2.5 stars and 4.5 stars, so they're all pretty close on like the medium high end. There were no 5 stars this month, unfortunately, but there were also no books that I hated. So it was all on the up and up, all a positive reading experience overall. So I thought I would try something new in terms of the order that I review the books this month. Last month I went through them in the order that I read them, but this month I'm going to go through them from lowest rating to highest rating, just so we build up some anticipation there. Why not? So let me know if this format works better or what you prefer, and yeah, this is all a learning process, and we're going through this together. So without further ado, let's get into those books. So the first book that I have to share with you today is The Girl in the Video by Michael David Wilson. This is a really short novella that was published in 2020 and is a horror. I gave this book 2.5 stars, which in my rating scale, that isn't a bad rating. 2.5 is very much just it is exactly half of 5. So it is very much a middle of the road book. So there were definitely things to like about this novella and definitely things that just kind of left me feeling kind of meh about it. So The Girl in the Video follows a man named Freddie who is from the UK, but he is living with his wife Rachel in Japan. And they are living there, they're happily married, they're working there, and they're just having a good time. But then Freddie starts getting these emails or like DMs. Mysterious people are sliding into his DMs and sending him these videos that are kind of strange and erotic and just generally kind of weird. So Freddie doesn't really know what to do with these videos. He's just he watches them kind of obsessively because they do kind of do something for him. But he's not really concerned about it until the emails and the videos and the kind of the way he is being DM'd just gets more and more extreme and personalized. And what he originally thought was just kind of like spam bot mail, he is now like, oh shit, I think somebody is stalking me. So this is very much about like the dangers of like cyber stalking, and you don't know who's out there and you don't know who knows what about you on the internet. This very much kind of reminded me of The Ring, but even more in like this technological social media world. I enjoyed the adventure of this novella. It's very short, but I think just by virtue of it being a novella, it did leave me wanting more at the end. And I could totally see how some people could argue that the reasons why it was so short and the reason why you didn't have all of your questions answered, that kind of adds to the terror. And I do think that's true, but I don't know. It just left me wanting more. So I can't ignore that feeling in myself. So if that premise interests you, I definitely recommend checking this out. I did enjoy it. There was one piece of text in here that it made me like scream laugh. Freddie is having a sex dream about this girl in the video, and he's having sex with her in this sex dream, and he refers to her womanly parts as her celestial sensation. And I couldn't get past that at the time. It kind of like made me die a bit. So yeah, I mean, that's in here too. That little slice of treasure is in here. So I don't regret reading this. It just wasn't my favorite of the month. I gave this 2.5 stars out of 5, and it was a fun little thriller horror. Next up, we've got Audition by Ryu Murakami. This book was published in 1997 in Japan and then published in English in 2009. I have now read 3 books by Ryu Murakami, and this one wasn't my favorite. I gave this one like a 2.5 or a 3, kind of in that realm. I will admit, I breezed through this book. This book is incredibly compelling, and it will have you like hooked right until the end. But I'm learning now that Ryu Murakami just likes to be just like abruptly and sensationally violent in his books. So there's definitely like a shock factor, and this one just like, it got me in a really bad way. So Audition, I don't really even want to go too much into the plot, because I feel like if you do want to check this out, like the experience of the plot and how like abrupt it is really part of it. But this book generally follows a man and his son. He is in his early 40s, and he was married, and his wife died when they were both very young. So he's only maybe like 40, 42-ish, and he is a widow, and he has a teenage son, and he's kind of just trying to figure out where his life goes from here. Like, does he remarry? Does he stay a bachelor? He's just not sure. And then he works in the film industry, and one of his friends like has this incredible idea that they should do a casting call for a movie that doesn't exist and make the leading role, make the star leading female role have all of the character attributes that this man loves. So he's essentially casting for a leading lady role, but in his life and in his heart. So yeah, I feel like premise-wise, like this just has all of the trappings of a nice rom-com meet cute, but this book is not that, and it is got some horrendous and horrific things that happen in it. If you are really into just like shock, gore factor, like definitely check this out. But trigger warnings, there is, I feel like I have to say, I would be a disservice if I didn't, that this book has some graphic and horrific and shocking violence against animals in it. And I do admit that I think is why this book has just the lower side rating that it does. That is something that really, really bothers me, and it was a lot in this book. So just know that. This is a really fast-paced, you will never be bored story, and it's Ryu Murakami, so it's gonna be violent. Next up, we've got a nice little middle grade YA. We've got Luca and the Fire of Life by Salman Rushdie, and this was published in 2010. I've had this book on my shelves for a long time. This was actually a gift from a friend, and I feel so bad that it took me so long to read it, because it was a wonderful little story. Luca and the Fire of Life is about a boy named Luca, and he is the son of a renowned storyteller. And one day his father goes to sleep and he doesn't wake up. So this is very much a, you know, a magical realism with some real world elements in there. So his father goes to sleep and doesn't wake up, and Luca needs to basically travel into this magic world to capture the fire of life, to bring it back and to allow his father to wake up. So when Luca goes into this magical world, he is meeting this cast of characters and mythological gods. It's very much like a quest novel. He's traveling on a magic carpet. He's traveling with two companions, a bear named Dog and a dog named Bear, which was very cute. And yeah, this was fun. It was charming. It really reminded me kind of like a mashup of Stardust and American Gods by Neil Gaiman, but very much packaged for a young audience. Like, I think this book may be categorized as YA, but it did definitely feel middle grade to me, for sure. I just needed something really nice and light, and this definitely delivered me that. I gave this 3 out of 5. It was just a nice little time, and I do recommend checking it out. Next up, we've got a nice little horror short story collection. We've got Everything That's Underneath by Kristi DeMeester. I really enjoyed this. This is a collection of horror short stories that was published in 2017. And these stories were tragic, and they were beautiful, and they were filled with this grim cosmic imagery. Her writing is very flowery, but in a grotesque way. Normally when I read horror short stories, I read an anthology front to back, and I almost think that may have been a disservice for this collection, because a lot of the stories felt really samey when I read them. So I don't know if that was just the way that she picked the anthology. She picked things that had very similar themes, but because I read it front to back, that actually made the stories kind of blend together in a way that I think negatively impacted my experience. If I just read them one at a time and really parsed these stories out, I think I would have loved it a lot more, because her writing was beautiful, and the kind of cosmic stories and that she tells in such a short amount of time were really impactful, but they did end up bleeding together. A lot of the themes that were explored kind of repetitively in this short story collection were revealing or concealing what's under the skin, both literally and metaphorically. There was a lot of stories about children consuming their parents or vice versa, infertility, violent and abusive relationships, fever dreams, the occult. There was a lot of occult storytelling and culty things in this. So a lot of the themes were very interesting. They kind of bled together as I read them. But again, that could be, I feel like the way I experienced this, somebody else could have read it the same way and have a completely different experience. So I do still recommend this. The two stories that particularly impacted me the most in this, it were The Beautiful Nature of Venom and The Fleshtival. Those two were standout, 5-star reads in this collection. Overall, I gave this collection 3 stars. I definitely recommend checking it out if you are into horror short stories. Her point of view and her writing and her voice is not to be missed. Next up, I've got Piercing, that I also read this month by Ryu Murakami. This book was initially published in Japan in 1994 and then published in English in 2007. I really enjoyed this story. This is again a horror thriller. This is very much like a psychological horror, I would I would position this as. Piercing follows a young married couple. It is from the point of view of the husband, and they have a newborn baby daughter. Like, they should be just so happy. It should just be a wonderful time for them. Except the husband, he just keeps having these intrusive thoughts that he can't shut out. Like, that's the definition of an intrusive thought. He can't get rid of it, that he wants to stab his baby with an ice pick. And he doesn't want to do it. Like, this is a horrifying thought to him, but he can't stop thinking about it. And then the whole premise of the book takes off from there. This is one of those books that it takes place maybe only even over the course of 24 hours or like 48 hours at the most. Like, it is a very fast-paced, like, short chunk of time that is explored, but it does do some jumping back in time to flesh out some backstory. This was an incredible story that dealt with the effects of and like the cycle of child abuse. Like, it's following a character who experienced like severe abuse as a child, and now that he is an adult, he is kind of coming full circle with that cycle and fighting with this like compulsion, intrusive thought that he has. And just like, it was a very yeah, it was just a really compelling read, and it had dealt with some very dark themes, but it was also really kind of like slapstick the way that the premise unfolds in the story. There's a lot of just like mishaps, miscommunications, like, oh, whoopsies, in a really gruesome and grotesque way. Like, this was at once brutal and also kind of funny. I enjoyed this one a lot more than Audition that I read this month. And yeah, if that premise interests you, I would recommend it. I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next up, I've got another horror. I've got Violet by Scott Thomas. This was published in 2019 and is just your classic haunting, your classic ghost story. Violet follows a woman named Chris, and she is in her late 30s, early 40s, and she has a young daughter, and her husband has just recently died in a tragic and horrific car accident. So Chris is like, we gotta get away. I gotta get my daughter away from this town. I gotta get her away from this grief. So they decide to go, and so Chris basically uproots her and her daughter, and they go to an old summer home that Chris her father owned and that she hasn't been to since she was a child. And the reason why she hasn't been to this home since she was a child is because it is also coincidentally where Chris's mother died of a very slow, painful, and like cancerous death. So you're kind of like, Chris, why are you taking your daughter to this place that is haunted with grief? So, but she's just got a plan. She's gonna bring her daughter to this cabin, and they are gonna get over it. They're gonna go through the grief process, and they are going to seek closure together. And so this book has some very like beautiful imagery of this lake house cabin. They're doing a lot of like restoration, and there's a lot of creepy haunted house elements happening here. This is definitely a slow burn horror. Like, if you're expecting something that's gonna be just super fast and jumpy outy, this is not that. The terror that creeps up in this story is very slow and deliberate, and it really plays off of the character development that you get in this. This book is told from Chris's point of view, and she is definitely an unreliable narrator. So that is if you like that premise, that is in here as well. So this is like your classic haunted house, ghost story, unreliable narrator, all mixed together into something that was just really enjoyable. I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it, but again, like, there was nothing 100% new out of this story. Like you've read the story before, you've read this plot before, this was a lot of tropes that have been used before, but it was done really well. So it was just a nice story, didn't really add anything new to the genre, but you will not be disappointed with what you read. This story also feels very cinematic to me. Like this could easily be adapted to a movie and it would do really well as a movie. So Violet by Scott Thomas. Ghost story. Check it out. Next up, I've got Confessions by Kanai Minato. This was published in Japan in 2008 and then published in English in 2014. This was a really fun and like compelling and sensational mystery thriller. I believe this was her first book that she published, and it was a really great fast-paced story. So Confession is told in about 3 or 4 parts, and it is all surrounding this young teacher. She brings her child to work every now and then because she's a single mother, and one day her daughter turns up in the pool having drowned, or at least that's what the police are saying. Ooh, maybe it's a murder. So this is one of those stories that surrounds a single event, and then each part is told from someone else's point of view to kind of more greater develop what actually happened. You're learning a little bit more each time we come into a different person's point of view. So we start with the teacher, and she is, grieving the loss of her daughter, but she also very much suspects that her child didn't drown and was in fact murdered. So we start out with her making her accusation, and then the book kind of takes off for there. This is definitely like a revenge story, and it is not a believable plot. Like, it's definitely like a sensational and wild and wacky story, but it was a lot of fun. Like, I definitely read it like, oh my god, what happened next? I can't even believe it. It definitely, like, every chapter ends in a huge cliffhanger where you're like, I gotta get on to the next one. So it was I guess it was very like dramatic in that sense. It was a very dramatic thriller, very dramatic mystery. It's a really fun ride. I will admit that by design, this story is a little bit repetitive because you are seeing the exact same event 5 different times, but from different people's point of view. So each time you see it, it's the same event, but it's being fleshed out in a slightly different way. So it did feel a little bit repetitive, but there is just so much action and so much like twists, so many like shocks that you will have a great time with this one. I definitely did, and I would definitely recommend. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. This was a fun time. Next up, I also read Penance by Kanai Minato. This book was published in 2012 in Japan and then published in English in 2017. And this is a straight up mystery. And in this book, this uses a lot of the same techniques that Kanai Minato had used in Confessions, but just kind of only even improves on them even more. So on the first page of this book, it says, there is like a starter intro that says, until 2010, Japan had a 15-year statute of limitations on the crime of murder. So this story really plays with that idea. So in Penance, we are following 5 girls in grade 4, and they are hanging out in the schoolyard after work, and a man approaches them and says that he needs help lifting something or reaching something up high in the pool room and wants a volunteer, and he will buy them all ice cream. So one of these girls volunteers and goes to help this man, and the rest of them are just waiting outside for their friend to return. So after an amount of time, they're like, oh, where's our friend? And they go to find her, and she has been brutally raped and murdered. So it is just a horrific, tragic like a life event that has happened to these 4 girls, but then also the whole community. And so at the start of this book, these 4 girls have had this like extremely abrupt and life-changing thing happen to them, and the mother of the girl that was murdered is blaming these 4 girls for her own daughter dying, and tells these girls in grade 4 that if you don't help catch this murderer, like if you don't help identify who this was, if you don't help us catch this murderer, I will never forgive you and I will seek revenge on you. So this book basically starts at this crime and then jumps like up 15 years, like right before the statute of limitations runs up for this murder, because almost 15 years have gone by and the murderer still hasn't been caught. And so this book explores what trauma and guilt do to a person. So it's again kind of like confessions, each from one of the different girls' point of view, and it's her in the present, like right before the statute of limitations goes up, and she's kind of reflecting on how her life went from this experience. So they each dealt with their guilt and their trauma in a very different way. Like this was an excellent character study. It really shows some really dark things about what can happen to a person when they experience something like this in such a formative time in their life. I loved this. This one definitely was more of a mystery, like psychological story, whereas Confessions was very much like a sensational thriller, like almost on like the unbelievable side. This one felt like it was more like a story of something that could feasibly happen. I love this. I would recommend it. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. So the last book I have to share with you is The White Road by Sarah Lotz. This is a survival horror that was published in 2017, and I will just start this off that if you are a fan of like isolation horror, survival horror, like horror set in like a very remote setting, The White Road is, I would recommend this for you, my friend. I gave this 4.5 stars. This was a near perfect read for me. So The White Road follows a man named Simon. Him and his pal Theory, they run this blog called Welcome to the Dark Side, where they basically post like listicles and blog posts about all things like dark and creepy and gruesome and dreary in the world. So they're basically trying to like have this blog take off, and they just need some real like sensational original content. So right now they're just doing a lot of sharing and reposting, but they need that OC, y'all. So Simon decides that he is kind of a climber. That's something that he does in his spare time. He's good at it. He decides that he is going to go caving, like spelunking, into a cave in Wales. There's like this famous condemned cave that it is illegal to go down there because a lot of people who go down there end up dying, because there's like a water system that runs through there that is very unpredictable. So people get stuck in there and they die. So they know that there is dead bodies down in this cave. So Simon's like, I'm gonna go down there and I'm gonna take video. I'm gonna take photos of these dead bodies. So they're very much trying to capitalize off of death and other people's grief for their site. So these boys are shitty, but they're doing their grind. So Simon goes down here. So the book takes off with Simon going down this cave and the events that happen down there. But then also in like a mid-book exchange, Simon also goes up Everest as well. So this book follows the horrors of spelunking and caving underground, but then also the horrors of climbing Everest. So this is an exceptionally well-researched book. Like the back of this book has like all of the the articles and the research and the studies that she had read, the Sarah Lotz had read about caving, and then also about Everest. You learn a lot about what it takes to climb Everest, something I have zero interest in now, even more so after reading this book. And this book also explores a psychological phenomenon that is real called the third man syndrome, where when you are in these like very extreme, like life-threatening scenarios, either isolated scenarios, either underground or really high up in the mountains, there's kind of this phenomenon that people experience where they feel like they are being haunted by someone. So this book does isolation horror and survival horror so well. Especially, like, it was especially successful because the character that you're following is like a piece of shit. Like, you're following this guy who he's only in these places so that he can capitalize off of other people's trauma and other people's grief, but you still are like, whoa, I don't want you to die this way, bro. So I really enjoyed this, and if you are into those themes and you're just kind of generally interested in what it takes to climb Everest, I highly recommend The White Road by Sarah Lotz. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I think the 0.5 came off just because Simon was a piece of shit. So there we have it. These were the 9 books that I read in the month of May. Let me know if you've read any of these and what you thought. Let me know if you want to read any of these now that you have seen me talk about them in this video. This was a really good reading month for me, and I cannot wait to see what June has in store for me reading-wise. So thanks again for being here. I really appreciate you guys hanging out with me and chatting about books. I just love chatting books with all you wonderful people. So stay safe out there. I just really wish you all the best, and until next time, see ya, pals.